Hello and welcome to the Energy Connect studio at the Future Energy Asia Summit and Exhibition 2024. I'm delighted to have joining me in the studio Narsingh Chaudhary, President for Asia Pacific and India for Black Veatch. Narsingh, it's a pleasure to welcome you back to the studio.
Thank you so much, and it's always great to be in Future Energy Asia, and I'm glad to be here talking to you.
Thank you. And to start off, what steps can Asia Pacific take to move to a low carbon future and which is affordable, secure and sustainable?
Yeah, look, I mean, we talk about the energy trilemma, and I always look at it that if you have a problem, you need the technologies, the industry and the government to come together. Our philosophy on dealing with this energy trilemma is what I call the electron, molecules and microbes coming together. It just needs what I call as bringing the best efficiency on the last molecule being generated, the last electron being generated, and using technology to bring all this together. So what does it mean? I mean, we talk about so much of renewables being added in the grid. How do we ensure that every bit of renewable energy, whatever is being generated, we put it to to the consumption? Like maybe a month back, there was a report where the world has reached 30% of green energy capacity in renewable generation, but the actual utilization of that is less than 5%. So if there is capacity being added, how do you ensure that there is grid, transmission lines and all those things, which allows us to use those last bit of electrons? The other piece is on molecules. I mean, energy transition cannot happen without switching from the most highest carbon footprint, so coal in this case. How do you move away from coal? I mean, renewable alone cannot act as a baseload. So is there a possibility of ensuring that we use LNG in this part of the world and be able to move away from coal? The last piece is there are solutions on green hydrogen, solutions on ammonia, and how do you start bringing them into the technology so that you don't have to wait for the technology to be fully evolved and developed. So there is a lot of elements which needs to be taken into consideration. Every country, every client has their own problem, and what we are seeing is proper planning and implementation of those can really help solve that problem for Asia Pacific.
That's an excellent point. And two things that constantly come up when you discuss the energy mix for Asia is LNG and coal.
Yep.
So, going forward, how do you see that LNG taking over some of the energy mix from coal and leading us to a cleaner future?
Yeah, great question. Look, when you look at coal, it's still the cheapest cost of electricity being produced. And in Asia, there are a lot of countries which are still struggling with how do they phase out the existing coal plants. But let's talk about the new plants which is being built. What is heartening to see is all the new plants which are being built or planned, none of the governments are supporting new coal-fired power plants being approving and including financing. But the issue is how do you get enough natural gas to be able to feed it into it? So take example of Philippines, where we are building the first LNG to power project, and there is infrastructure which is required to build for importing LNG, regasifying it, and all those stuff. So how does the government and the industry come together? Because it requires a huge captive investment. We also know the volatility on the LNG prices. There's some support needed for the industry and the government to come together and ensure that they are able to find a solution to that. But I always say is the only way to come out and be able to get to net zero is we need to phase out coal. There is no future. Black Veatch as a company, we exited coal in 2020. And I think that was the best and smartest move the company had done, because now that's enabling us to focus purely on cleaner fuels, whether it's LNG or as renewable or green hydrogen, and we are seeing the positive effect of it.
Circling back to your point about renewable energy and the fact that the world has reached 30% plus, but then the utilization is only 5%. So as capacities increase, now, will expanding the power transmission network help the region in terms of frequency and voltage?
It will. I mean, if you look at when Vietnam started, in the region, Vietnam was the first one to start with a lot of solar rooftop power, including many solar farms which were there. And these were in isolated locations. So if the electrons cannot be brought to the consumer, and it cannot be done in a manner, because renewable is also very erratic depending on the weather condition, depending on the time in the day. So the grid has to be not only available, the grid also needs to be smart enough, because what you don't want is the grid being unstable, right? So when you look at those factors, it requires proper planning. So when large power plants were being built, the transmission line was planned together with the power plant and connected to the grid network. Now when you have hundreds of distributed generation, it brings a huge instability in the grid. So it's bringing the electrons, but also having the dynamic system in the grid being able to manage those hundreds of consumers and hundreds of producers, and being able to find the balanced load. So it's a complex thing, but it can be achieved actually.
Moving to the next stage, which is about energy storage.
Yeah.
And how do you see energy storage technologies evolving to cope with this, the surge in electricity?
So LNG storage is a problem because the technology has not evolved much. There has not been enough focus on finding alternate ways of storing LNG. So it's still the same old traditional technology using double tank storage, whether it's steel or concrete, and that's how those plants are being built. But the capital investment behind that is huge. The way I see in some cases where the financial viability of those projects are getting better is to ensure that there's not just one power plant designed for one LNG plant. There has to be multiple consumers, whether industrial or power plant producers. We have built a couple of LNG plants. What we also find is you could have a full onshore regasification facility. You could have a floating regasification facility. But you could also do a hybrid of onshore plus offshore. And there are benefits of each of this. And depending on where the LNG production or regasification facility are, what it needs is a careful planning so that you can reduce the capital expenditure. The technology itself, no rocket science there.
That's really interesting to hear, and I think some of the technologies onshore here at Future Energy Asia. Today is the first day and it's quite busy out here. So what are your thoughts about this show, and what are you showcasing at Black Veatch?
So Black Veatch, every year we come, we have something new. This year our theme has been on green hydrogen. We are building 380 megawatts of green hydrogen projects across 3 different sites in US. Once those projects go in production, they would add 50% of the capacity of green hydrogen as molecule. We are also seeing a lot of investments being made in CCUS. My personal belief is there is no net zero without CCUS. LNG is being talked about very, very strongly. In fact, I haven't seen in my last 10, 15 years of my career so much of interest on LNG production, because the world needs LNG. So those are the 3 key themes that I'm hearing. Of course, solar is there, the wind is there. The last piece is the nuclear, SMR. There is a lot of interest because people know that SMR can be a base load. It's one of the cleanest fuel, but of course there are political and social angle to it, which needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. And before we go, final question. What's common between beer, biochemicals and cheese?
Oh, microbes. Look, I said at the beginning of, when you had the first question, bringing the molecules, electrons and microbes. And microbes have a big role. They have always been there. Naturally, if you really look at whenever there is waste or any of those, microbes are the one which helps degenerate and make better use of it, dissipating in the atmosphere. Why don't we make best use of it? So we did one project in China, actually. It's a patented technology from a US company, where we take methane gas, CH4, and convert it into single cell protein, which can be used for fish food or animal food. That's a brilliant way of using it for better purpose, because the world is also falling short of food. Sustainable aviation fuel is others. There is also e-methane and so many other technologies. And all of this is using microbes as a fermentation process. So bringing the molecules, microbes and the electrons, as I said, can help us deal with the energy trilemma.
Looking forward to that dynamic future, and thanks so much, Narsingh, for outlining the landscape for future energy in Asia and beyond.
Thank you so much. And you know, it's always a great venue for us to catch up with people, exchange ideas, and every time I'm here, I'm learning something new. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for all the questions.
Thank you. Thanks for watching, and a quick reminder to follow us on LinkedIn and our other social media channels. I will be back with more studio interviews from Future Energy Asia. Stay tuned.